Hi everyone. So many of the projects that I've demonstrated for you in the past have been project-based, and I love that. I love to give you some new ideas for things to try. But this project is less about the product and more about the learning that comes with it. It's nice because there is a product at the end. It's not just a practice exercise that produces a larger and larger pile of learning. We're gonna make a sushi dish, and we're gonna do it by throwing a bottomless cylinder, trying to maintain a very even wall thickness and balance extra clay at the top with any extra clay that you're leaving behind at the bottom so that there's symmetry from top to bottom in the cylinder, which means on the two sides of your sushi dish, there will be symmetry. That may or may not make sense if you've never seen this before, but let me get to it and show you exactly what I mean as we have this exercise that's gonna help us build more even walls, more consistent results in all of our pieces. This is a project that you can do at just about any scale, but I'm choosing to do it at about 2.5 pounds, 2.25 pounds, something like that. They're harder and harder to handle and pick up the bigger they get, but they become more of a soap dish than a sushi plate if we make it with a smaller piece. So let's do this, you'll see, and you can scale it up or down depending on your preference. Okay, so stuck down to the wheel. Step one is getting it really well centered. This is gonna look a little bit funny because I've been working with red clay and I didn't change my water in my bucket. So if you're wondering what that weird color is, that's what's going on. Now, the basic idea is that we're gonna turn this into a bottomless cylinder. We're gonna split it down one side, cut it off the wheel, and then pick it up and lay it down flat. So we need the walls to be uniform. We also need the cylinder to be perfectly vertical if we want to get a rectangle. And whatever diameter we create on our cylinder is going to be multiplied by pi to give the length of the tray. So we don't want to go too wide or it's going to get really, really long. The nice thing about this is you just open until you hit metal. So that's not a part of the process that you have to worry about. You do just want to make sure that you're keeping your thumb nice and still as you're going down. I'm down to the bottom now. I'm going to open out, and again, not too wide, or you'll end up with a very, very long tray. I want it basically just barely big enough for me to get my hand inside and do the remaining steps. I want to talk to you about some things that are going to help you get some success with pulling a nice cylinder. One of those is a thing that I picked up from Kyle Jones. It's this, he called it the North Carolina claw move. And so I think of my pinch or my pull as being a pinch between the pads of my middle and ring finger of both hands. But I can bring in some helpers to get the clay up a little bit more effectively. So my left thumb can sneak to the outside to join my outside fingers. And then if you put your hand inside the cylinder with all 4 fingers, you can't actually push in the middle unless you really bend your fingers backwards. So you're almost immediately stretching the cylinder out. So if you turn your hand, you can get a single point of contact on the side of your middle finger, and that allows you to bring your index finger to the outside to join your hand. So my left hand is actually doing a lot. My thumb is over here on the outside squeezing clay, and my index finger is joining my hand for extra stability. Now I've been talking and letting the water kind of dry up. So let's do that first pull, and we're gonna really dig in, grab a hold of that clay, and start it moving up and in the right direction. I have a sponge in my hand, so if I get dry, I can dispense a little bit more water, and it takes a little extra coordination to keep that sponge in the palm of your hand, or you can keep it between your thumb and the rest of your hand. But it's really helpful. Whatever pot you're making, it's good to consolidate the rim after each pull, and especially with this sushi dish project, the bottom of our cylinder is going to be flat because it's just wired off of the wheel. We want to maintain a nice flat top as well. So that's the first pull. You're set up really well. You're starting to get some of the thickness out of the bottom. It's fairly even. it's tipping slightly inward because it's easier to bring it out than to have to collar in. And we're ready to go in for the second pull. With the second pull, I can't reach anymore with that outside thumb. So I abandoned the North Carolina claw on the second pull. It's just a first pull thing. I'm gonna make sure I'm nice and wet. I'm putting the water on as the wheel spins so it goes everywhere equally. And I'm gonna join my hands up and squeeze. I'm not rising yet, but now I'm rising. So I really want to get a hold of some clay before I start trying to head towards the ceiling. One thing that I think is quite helpful to think about is that any move you do on the wheel, but especially a pull, should start from stillness. I'm not rising initially, I'm just squeezing. Then you should gradually increase some motion, move towards the top, and then slow down and arrive at stillness again, just below the rim. And then when you release, it's a slowly away from the pot kind of release rather than a follow through up in the direction we were pulling. Those little tips will make all the difference for you in keeping your walls even. The third pull for me is always either just a shaping pull or kind of a double checking that I haven't left anything behind that could be useful. So I'm just gonna go to the bottom of the wall again and just check and see what I've got. This time I can't even join my two hands. So I'm just gonna do my best to imagine the join. I've got my right arm anchored against my thigh. And as soon as I can connect, I do, because you're always more kind of intelligent with your hands when the hands are joined. And then I don't want to thin out the top too much because I want it to balance the thicker clay that's left behind at the bottom. And that's not a deficiency in technique, that's just a function of our anatomy. The ends of our fingers are rounded, so there's always going to be a little extra swoop of clay down there at the bottom, and it's not a problem. If you're making a mug or something like that, you can use your wood knife to trim that little bit off. And in the case of this sushi dish, that extra clay will provide kind of an interesting edge or border to the tray. I need to do a little bit of work to eliminate the slip off the surface. And I also noticed that my rim is flaring out a little bit more at the top than at the bottom. So I'm gonna collar a little bit and compress the lip again. Collar a little bit. I just want to make sure that that looks like it's the same diameter at the top and bottom. And then I want to take slip off of the surface of this pot because I need to be able to pick it up. And as you know, I'm sure, picking up a wet pot is like picking up a slippery fish. It just doesn't happen. So let's get the ribs on there. This is also going to provide an opportunity to create some surface interest that will translate to the finished piece. We don't really want it to look like we made it on the slab roller. We want it to look like it came from the wheel. That gives it a little more dynamic life. So I'm going to slow that wheel way down. I'm just traveling towards the rim relatively quickly. I didn't come through the rim because I want to maintain the integrity of that top edge. And I'll probably go back for one more pass because I want to make sure that it's really nice and dry. So I'm at the bottom, making some contact. My rib is kind of 45 degrees away from my body so that it does some degree of scraping and removing of goo, but it also compresses the wall and strengthens it and pushes any aggregate or grit, grog in this case, of Phoenix clay down below the surface. All right, so that's the exercise. You want to pull until you estimate that the wall thickness is uniform throughout, and that you've got kind of an even amount of extra thickness on the top as you do on the bottom. I find it helpful to just do a little tiny snowplow move with my wooden knife. So I put the blade flat to the wheel and then angle the tip back in the wrong direction, back towards me, and just get this moisture away from the edge. I'm not removing a lot of material. I want to leave that little bit of excess because that can be matched with excess at the top. And that'll create kind of a nice edge. When I do form this into the dish itself, I will, I'll go over it with the chamois and soften any hard edges, so it's not a huge deal. Now, getting this thing off the wheel is a little bit of a trick. So you need to use your wire cleverly. We want to separate it from the wheel first, and then we'll split the wall down the side. We're only going to split it on one side, so I guess if you made one that was bigger in diameter, you could split it down both sides and the two halves could each become something. But for the purpose of this exercise, in music, we'd call it an etude. This is your etude for producing even wall thicknesses. It makes more sense to just do it as a single cut. So I've got most of the goop off of my hands. I'm going to go ahead and wire under it. I will do it with a spinning wheel because I like the way it leaves marks. And then I want to go down into the interior. I want to make sure the handle of the wire is trapped inside my hand, and I'm going to run the end of the wire off of my index finger so that my hand can get down inside without bumping the walls. And I'll go to the very bottom of the wall, and then I'll let go with my outside hand and open up a path with my right hand for the wire to come back out without recutting. Don't try to come back out with the pot just as it was, or you'll end up making a mess. All right, I'm putting the bat pin hole over to the right so that I can kind of use it as a visual aid to cutting straight down. I'm just going to take my time and try to cut it as straight as I can. And it's not perfect. I always wander a little bit, but it's mostly straight. Now I'm down to the bottom. I'm going to let go of the outside hand, and I'm just going to take my hands and pull that open a little bit. And now I can get that wire out without bumping into anything. Now let me turn this for you so you can kind of see where I am. I've got the cylinder split open, and I am now ready to pick it up off the wheel and transfer it to a waiting board. So I just happen to have a bat here that'll work. It would be better to have a nice drywall board, but I like to turn the wheel so that the opening is towards me, and I'm going to put my thumbs inside the cut. I'm going to wrap my fingers gently around the sides, and then I'm going to just carefully lift and then carefully drape this down onto the wheel. And now's the time where I get to assess the quality of my performance on this etude or this exercise. So when you look at the wall thickness, it's thicker at the top, it's thicker at the bottom, and it's pretty uniform throughout. It's not paper thin. You'll notice that there is plenty of meat there, and that is a good thing. When you're learning to do your best pulls for your best forms, very often you pull the clay up and then stretch it into a new shape. And if you get in the habit of pulling things to the point where they're about to collapse, you don't have that material to change the profile. So even wall thickness from bottom to top is significantly more important than achieving some areas of thinness. Generally, when we get obsessed with making thin walls, we end up with a lot of thinness at the very top and a lot of thickness at the bottom. And this whole sushi plate exercise is designed for you to produce a nice uniform cylinder with uniform wall thickness, straight walls, so that you end up with a pretty good rectangle. And in the end, if you end up deciding that it'll be nice to kind of bring the edges up and smooth out this raggedy edge from the inside of the cylinder and maybe even define the corners a little bit. These can be quite cool as little trays. You don't have to eat sushi on them if you're not into it. They work great for other little hors d'oeuvres and things, make a nice cheese plate. But the main thing it does is it makes you better at pulling uniform and stable, even cylinders. So I hope that you'll give this project a try. I also hope that you won't be discouraged if the first time out it's really thick at the bottom and less so at the top. That's kind of the point, is to identify that problem and train your hands on what it should feel like when you're actually producing a uniform wall thickness. Have fun with it, guys, and I hope it really is a game changer for you and all of your other pottery making. The sushi dish is sat overnight to achieve leather hard stiffness, actually more soft leather hard. And I wanted to go ahead and show you how you go from this cut open cylinder to something that's a little bit more functional as a tray to eat off of. So first thing I want to do is establish what the base of the tray is going to be. In other words, where the corners of the part that'll stay flat on the table will be. So I'm thinking maybe coming in about 1.25 inches or so from the edges in all 4 corners. And what I want to do is establish my corners first and then worry about bringing the sides up. And I'll show you how to do that with your hands. You want to put your thumbs kind of flat into the corner and then lift with your fingers and work your way up towards the corner and kind of create almost like a mitered picture frame corner. And do that on all 4 corners. Kind of using your thumb pads to keep the corner down against the table and then working that corner. So it's a little bit of a pinch, a little bit of a fold. I'll do the same thing here. Try not to really poke into it with my thumb, but I definitely want to make sure that that corner stays flat to the table. And then from there, the cut edges tend to kind of roll up a little bit anyway, but I'll work on lifting those. The top and bottom need to be lifted. And the trick is, just like in the corners, you want to keep the flat side down, or the flat central area of the plate down, while bringing the sides up. I'm going to use the side of my hand to do that and kind of establish the line that connects the 2 corners. I'll do the same thing on the other side. It's kind of easier to do it with the fingertips away from you, so I'll turn that thing around. It's kind of convenient to hand build or alter on the wheel. You can turn things with your foot pedal instead of having to do it with your hands. Now let's just refine these ends. So I'm going to, same thing, put my finger towards that corner that I've established and bring that up. The reason why it's important to get your corners set up first is that otherwise, if you lift one side, it pushes the other down, lift this side, it pushes the other down. So you want to get that corner lifted up so that the 4 corners are the highest points. Now, admittedly, that still looks fairly raggedy because this is the flared edge that was just wired off at the bottom. I'm going to hold this up a little closer to the camera so you can still see what that issue is. That edge there is really raggedy and rough. That often happens where you wire off a piece, and so let me show you my favorite trick for beginning to solve that problem. If you just try to smooth it over, all these raised goobers just get pushed down in random ways. So instead, what I want you to do, I'm going to hold it up closer so you can see it. I want you to take your fingers like you're pinching and place them at one side of that seam, and then just slide your finger along. And what it does is it shears off all those little goobers and gets rid of them before you try to smooth things down. Now I've got, it's still sharp, but it's kind of more uniform and good to go. At this point, I want to make sure there are no sharp parts. So kind of run my hand along the side of that. The corners are all a little bit sharp because they were just cut with a wire. So sometimes I'll just tap them with the pad of my finger. But the chamois can be really, really helpful for hand building as well as for using the wheel. So here's my chamois again. I'm going to take the chamois and create a little bit of a loop. I'm going to place that loop over that edge that I just smoothed and run along it. I guess that's 4 times. Do the same thing from the other side. I always like to come from the outside towards the middle. And this may necessitate coming back over it with my hands and lifting back up. I am kind of squishing it down a little bit, but this step is really important. These cut edges here from the wire, where I originally removed the piece from the wheel, I'm going to wrap around both sides and come in from the corner towards the middle. I don't want to do too much because I want to see the texture from my wire tool, but I don't want to leave anything sharp and chippy. And then I will just kind of reset those lifted sides a little bit. And with these, I really don't mind if there's a little bit of a wavy edge. You know, you can put it up really straight with a very flat hand and try to be as accurate as possible, or you can embrace the kind of natural flow. You can embrace these little flowing lines from where we use the rib on the inside. And either way is right. It's whatever you like. Now, because these are made from a thrown cylinder, the clay has been, I guess, encouraged to follow a diagonal swooping path up the side of the cylinder. And then when we cut it, there's some clay memory built into these. And so if you just dry them really, really fast, they tend to lift on 2 corners and sink on 2 others. It's sort of a twisting motion that I think relates to the original spiral. So I definitely recommend drying these slowly under plastic to prevent that warping, especially once you've got it kind of set up nice and smoothed out and ready to go. So I will set that aside and put it under plastic. Here's a close-up of the final tray. Those are the wall thicknesses. That was the whole point of the exercise. Nice and even, thick at the top, thick at the bottom. I sort of like the texture of the wire tool that I left visible on that edge. If you really love the wire tool and you want it on all the edges, you could, instead of just flattening that top edge with your fingers, you could actually slice a little tiny bit off with the wire tool so that every edge was a wire cut edge. But for the purposes of this exercise, this is great. This is what you're shooting for. Nice even wall thickness, material left at the top and the bottom. Good luck, and I hope you really enjoy this project, the final product, and also the process as it helps you improve your throwing skills.